One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. I love a reunion. Right? Like, did you love the Friends reunion that they did? I mean, it was so good. I loved how, it was so nostalgic. I cried. I mean, come on, I'm so embarrassed, but whatever. I cried at just so many different things because the actors were overwhelmed by things. And it was so beautiful to see them revisit this nostalgic, pop culture phenomenon that lives in American history of like the greatest show of all time. Let's just be honest. Like, it's so incredible. I love Friends, love, love, love it. And I just love the idea of these people that haven't seen each other in a while getting back together and reminiscing about all the good old days. Well, that's a little bit about today's guest that I'm so excited to share with you, because we have someone that has literally been a part of my podcasting journey from day one. And we have such a special bond, like such a cool connection. And I'm so grateful that Travis Albritton is coming back on the show today. So Travis has been somebody, like I said, from the very beginning. I remember when I first got started, and y'all can go back and listen to, I'm going to link in the show notes to the original interview that I did with Travis. And I want you to go listen to Crystal, like baby podcaster, baby content creator. And I had all the questions for him. And I'm laughing at it because I remember when the Facebook group for Buzzsprout was around 2,000 people. And Travis was the one that was, admitting people, answering questions. Like, he was running the whole thing. He was the head of content at Buzzsprout for a long time. Like, you will instantaneously know his voice if you have listened to any episodes of Buzzcast, which is Buzzsprout's podcast, or watched their content on YouTube. You're gonna be like, oh my gosh, yeah, I know exactly who Travis is. But Travis is actually doing something brand new that I am so thrilled about. whenever he told me what he was doing, I was like, this is incredible for you. And I just cannot wait to share it. But Travis is now today the host of Honest Marketing, which is a podcast dedicated to teaching business owners and entrepreneurs proven strategies to grow their business without selling their soul. He also is a founder of Honest Podcast, a full-service podcast production agency that specializes in high-quality video podcasts for distribution on YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Travis. Let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach you how to start, launch, and market your content with confidence. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of content creation, this is the show that will help be your time-saving shortcut. So let's get right to it, shall we? All right, Profit Podcast listeners. We have a very special guest today. We have Travis in the house. Welcome to the show, Travis.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So this is actually, I was trying to think back. You guested on the show when it was the Rookie Life, like way back when. And then you came on the show again when it was the Profit Podcast, I was thinking, or maybe I'm thinking it could have been, we're going to link to all the previous episodes of Travis, because he is somebody that you've been there since the beginning of my journey, like in a really profound way. And I'm going to embarrass you for a second because I can, because it's my show. I'm in the host seat at this point. Okay. Yeah. Travis helped me tremendously in the very beginning. So I'm going to make us feel old. This is 2018 when I got started. Travis answered all of my annoying questions with so much patience and so much just generosity. And I have to say thank you so much, because we would not be sitting here today talking about all the fun things we're going to talk about. So thank you so much for always encouraging me and being part of this journey. So I couldn't let this episode go any further without getting that off my chest. So sincerely, thank you so much.
Oh, that means a lot. Thank you so much, Crystal. Glad that I can just be one of the people on the path to your greatness and all the things that you've done. So
to your greatness, to your world domination. So happy. Well, if anybody is listening and you're like, Travis' voice sounds really familiar, it's because you would have heard him here on the show or on other podcasts, or possibly a YouTube channel that you are all familiar with, because I reference it all the time. But Travis is coming to us not from Buzzsprout today. Travis is coming on a brand new adventure that he has started, and I cannot wait to talk all about it, because he has a brand new show called Honest Marketing. And I just have to know, where did this come from? I have a feeling as a marketer, there was a deep need that you were seeing. And I have to know where this idea came from.
Sure. So I'll share the fun piece of the story, and then I'll break down the strategy of it as well.
Awesome.
Because I know that'll be really relevant and helpful for all your listeners. So I think being in the marketing space and doing content marketing for Buzzsprout for 4 years, doing digital marketing for 6 or 7, you see a lot of advice and you see a lot of trends. Okay. And so a lot of the advice tends to be towards the entrepreneur, because just practically that's the person that's spending money on the software or the tool or the course to get the results they want, which is, how do I make more money online? But rarely is the advice, what's in the best interest of your customers, of the people buying that course, of the people going through your funnel, experiencing your website. And I was just kind of like fed up that there wasn't more resources out there talking about how to actually market with integrity, because it's totally possible. And you actually make more money if people feel like they can trust you and that you're not just trying to screw them over all the time. And so that's where the idea for Honest Marketing came from, was let's just start highlighting the people that are doing this the right way, that are building businesses the right way on top of integrity and values, and really breaking down the systems and the processes that businesses can use and marketers can use in order to get similar results that they would in a performance or a pay-per-click model, but with a more holistic, service-oriented approach towards your clients and your customers. And so you're thinking about your brand and what people know you for and the reputation you have in the space. And you're thinking about how to actually do good in the world with your podcast. It's not just about making money, but it's about doing something that's worthwhile. And so that's where the spark came from, just like this desire to say, you know what, we're gonna shift the narrative here. It's not just gonna be about how do we increase your opt-in rate by 2% by creating some fake scarcity and a countdown timer that doesn't do anything to try and get people to get you their credit card before they even know that they want the thing. It's like, let's just get rid of all of that and go back to how do you solve real problems for people in their lives and help them feel seen and heard and that they can trust you to take care of them in the journey. Like, let's just get back to that. So that's really what it is, but in a online world. So breaking down content marketing, digital marketing, paid ads campaigns, all that stuff. Strategically, why it makes sense for me to do this podcast, because being at Buzzsprout and being in the podcasting world, you know, there's never a lack of things to talk about, especially if you love to hear yourself talk. And so it's like,
why were you looking at me when you said that, Travis? Come on.
I was looking into the camera because I know that's what I'm supposed to be doing. You know, that's where you look. You look at the camera. You don't. So, but podcasters love to talk. It's why we do it, right? If you didn't like to hear yourself talk, you wouldn't do a podcast. But so my new business venture that you kind of teased, I launched a podcast production agency called Honest Podcasts. And it's helping values-oriented business owners and entrepreneurs create content marketing that aligns with their business values, but helps drive performance for their business. And so that is what I do as an agency. That's my service in the marketplace is you have a business, you want to make an epic podcast, I can do that for you. So then the podcast was not only a way for me to lead with my values and to attract people that would resonate with that. They're like, yeah, I shouldn't have to sell my soul in order to make money online. Like there has to be a better way. And so maybe there could be a connection there. But then by using it as a platform to interview potential clients, then it's much easier to get someone who's in a position at a company that would be interested in a service like mine to give you an hour of their time. It's very difficult to do in like a cold call or cold email sense to be like, hey, I do this great thing. Can I get an hour on your calendar? It's like, no, I got my own life. I got my own stuff going on. But if I extend an olive branch and say, I would love to bring you on to talk about these 3 things that I know you're an expert in and highlight your expertise and what your business does to my audience. And this is the values that we share and the connection that we have. Now we have an entire hour to build rapport and to build a relationship. And now I have your contact info and we've actually had a dialogue and a conversation. Right. So now if it does make sense and you're like, actually, this has been a great experience. I have enjoyed being on your podcast. What would it look like for you to do that for us? Like, what would a podcast for our company look like? It's a very natural next step. And so strategically, using the podcast, not just a way of serving people, which it certainly is. And most of the people that listen to it will never give me money. And I'm really excited about that. But it's also a great vehicle to connect with people that would otherwise be unreachable as a way of also growing the business as well. So that's how the podcast came together.
So there y'all go. You have his whole strategy there. It's all honest. It is so straightforward. But this is the thing that I love about this model is because you're not trying to like bait and switch people and say, hey, we should do this. I think that a lot of people, especially for my show, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, having run several podcasts, it's like, you can feel that sliminess in a pitch where it's like, ooh, I would love to come on your show, or we'd love to have you on our show and this and that. So I think that this is such an incredible approach if executed properly. And Travis just gave you all the things. It's all about just leading with integrity. But I have to ask, is there like this one awful experience that you ever had with marketing that like really comes to mind that you're like, oh, if I ever had a platform or an opportunity to right this wrong, like, is there anything that's coming to mind?
Oh, 100%. And I actually share this in the first episode that I do for the show. When I break down my laws of honest marketing. Mm-hmm. And one of the laws of honest marketing, which I totally made up, but you know, they're written in semi-stone, and if other people take it, I trademarked it. So you heard it here. Is actually a riff on the PETA pledge, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And it's, can you say no humans were harmed in the marketing of your product or service? Can you actually stand behind that and say that is the standard we hold ourselves to? Not just does our product help people, but in the process of learning about what we do And in the process of becoming a customer, can we say that we did not harm them in any particular way? Lean into a trauma in their life to twist the knife and say, here's a big problem, let's make it bigger so you'll give us money. And for me, the story you're referring to that you kind of intuitively knew was there, I was doing a launch. I was doing a product launch. So also in my past, I had an online teaching ministry. I was selling courses, memberships, coaching, helping leaders start online ministries. And I was doing a big launch. And so I had several upsells built into it. It's like, well, if you want this program, you might also like this one, and you might also like this one. Just as a way of helping continue to serve people and give them more resources to help them with what they wanted to do next. But I had used some of these best practices, industry best practices, for maximizing your profit.
For everybody listening, he just put quotes around best practices. We have to make sure that was
yeah, air quotes, best practices.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, if you just like make this change, you'll get this much more money. And I'm like, that sounds great. Why would I not want that? So at the end of that launch, I immediately had people turn around and say, I need to cancel. I want my money back. Not because I don't believe in the product and what you're doing, but because of how it made me feel to buy it. Because of the pressure I felt to make a quick decision in the moment on something I didn't feel fully informed about. And if that is how the rest of this relationship is going to be, then this isn't going to be a fit for me. And that really stung, right? Because here I am trying to help people, especially in like a Christian space. It's like there's a lot of weight attached to that. And they're feeling like I'm being manipulative of their emotions in order to get more money. And so that's really stuck with me. And I think that was really a key pivot point for me, where I said, you know what? There actually is a point in time where it's not worth it anymore, where that extra couple dollars, it's just not worth it to me, because there are other things that are more important than how profitable a launch can be or how profitable a marketing campaign could be. But I actually want people to have a positive experience of me and to have a positive brand affinity, if you can call it that.
Yeah.
Where whenever they think about me, it's always about Travis is here to help. And that's the only impression they get. And there's no sense of manipulation, of coercion, of just like persuading someone to make a decision that's not good for them, but just good for me. Like, I never want any of that to even be hinted at in anything that I do. But that came from experience. That came from a really sour taste in my mouth of, wow, this is what these incremental decisions made with the best of intent have led me to. Let me get as far away from that as I possibly can.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that, because I'm imagining I've had a similar experience, and there's a visceral, like full body when you're reading these words from someone and you know that wasn't your initial intention, and you had no way of ever thinking that that's what was happening on the back end for your customer. And then you see it, and then you look at everything in hindsight and you're like, oh my gosh, like that's exactly what I did. And you could say, I'm sorry 1,000 times. And of course, it's probably not going to matter to that person. But I think that you're doing such an incredible thing and taking it and making sure that other people know there's a better way and there's another way to do it. But I'm curious if, in looking back, like let's say you go back to that launch and someone's listening right now and they're just getting started and they're like, well, Travis, I don't know if I've ever done any of these things, but I know for sure I want to avoid them. Do you have any tips for if someone's laying out, let's say they're laying out a launch for the new year and they're looking at their podcast, they're looking at their website, they're looking at their emails and all the things that they're going to incorporate in there. Do you kind of apply the same principles throughout everything, or do you do very specific things for each different platform?
So I think it starts first with, what is the filter that you're going to make those decisions with? Because that's the easiest, like simple solution. Mm-hmm. So because the techniques and everything will change, they change all the time, right? It used to be you have these big live launches and now evergreen webinars are back. So it's always kind of circulating and coming around. So I would think whenever you're thinking about a decision, whether you're writing an email, creating sales copy for a landing page, putting together a webinar, a pitch, ask yourself, how would I feel if I told my best friend to go through this process? Would they come out on the other side like, that's you, 100%. I felt you and your personality and everything you stand for through the whole process? Or would they come away thinking, wow, like that's not the you that I know. That is a helpful filter, because then that'll help you decide, like, should I put this countdown timer here at the top of the page to get more people to click on it? But I know, like, it's just going to reset on Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how would I feel if my best friend found out that she made a purchase or he made a purchase because the time was running out, but it just just resets on Thursday? And they found out about that. Like, would that negatively impact the relationship? Probably, right? So if you're going to have a countdown timer, have it actually mean something. So, like, I think once you have that filter in place of, I don't want to do anything that would hurt my best friend if they were going through this process or hurt our relationship in any way, then that gives you the decision-making to know what to do, what not to do, what to emphasize, not emphasize. And then I think at some point also believing that some of it is just not going to be up to you. Like, when it comes to a launch, it's so easy to get wrapped up in the numbers and dissect every little thing. And okay, this thing went wrong, so that's my fault. This thing went wrong, so that's my fault. I'll never forget, I did a launch in January for a product and I did $25,000. I did the exact same launch in June to twice as many people and only cleared $15,000. And it was better. So it's like, is that my fault? I have no idea, right?
Yeah.
Things happen.
Yeah.
It's not always your fault. It's not always, and so once you accept that things are going to happen outside of your control, that allows you to just show up with a service-oriented mind and to say, whatever this is going to be, it's going to be, and I'm going to be pumped and excited that I'm taking incremental steps forward with wherever you are in the journey. I think there's so much pressure to just, like, have a big launch or to grow really quickly and be able to have these big numbers that, become case studies for other people. But most people that I know that are successful in the online space, they've been doing it for 10 years, 15 years.
Yeah.
And so it's not that they had this, like, one big launch turning point, is that they built up skills over time until they became the best at what they did. And then that's why people do business with them. So I think if you can have the patience to have small launches and to have, months where you just do like $100, but like, no, I'm in this for the long haul. I'm in this not because I'm just trying to make money, but because I really want to help people. I'm excited about what I get to do. Then everything becomes a lot easier to be patient. Yeah. And you don't have to press as much. You don't have to try and squeeze every dollar out of everything. You can just say, I just want to make my imprints on the world with my business, and I want my clients and my customers to come away better for it. And if you can have the patience that, it doesn't have to be just knock it out of the ballpark, then that also allows you to feel really good about what you're doing too.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
I love that everything that you just said, it not only follows the principles of honest marketing, but it doesn't have the hustle culture attached to it. I feel like right now when we're recording this, it's like very anti-hustle culture is like the new trend, which is kind of,
Sure.
Everything's so cyclical and so weird in the marketing space. But I feel like when it comes down to what you're willing to kind of put on the line, like you said, put the filter of your best friend through it, and then everything that you just talked about, the key takeaway that I hear is patience. And Travis, I'm not patient. And I'm like, but it's also the thing that has kept me in this game. You and I both, like, we've been in the industry long enough to see these meteoric rises of all these creators and also the plummet. Like, we've seen the rise and the fall of so many businesses, so many creators. And I know that you have a lot of background in not just podcasting, YouTube marketing, website marketing, like all the different email marketing. And I'm curious, in you taking all the knowledge that you've gained over the years and applying it to your new content and your new business, what are some of those things that you're like, I'm so glad I learned this the first time, or I'm so glad I know this now? Like, do you have any tips to someone that's listening and they're just getting started and they're like, I want what Travis has. I want to have this type of platform, but how can I kind of leapfrog some of the big mistakes? That's what I'm asking really. It's like, what's your biggest mistake, Travis? Just tell us.
So I think my biggest mistakes typically come from trying to take a shortcut, to be honest. So coming back to patience, it's, I think I can go from here to there faster if I just do this. And then most of the time it backfires because shortcuts don't usually work. It's nice to imagine that there's a silver bullet out there and that's the reason that you're not successful, but it's likely not the case, right? And going back to patience, something that I heard recently from a creator that really resonated with me was that patience is not an emotion, it's an action. And so I think the idea of being patient can feel very agonizing, but if your actions reflect a person who is patient or showing patience, then you are patient, whether you like it or not, right? I don't like using patience. That's not something I enjoy. It's not a fun experience. But if you look at what you actually do and how you actually conduct yourself, and that shows patience, then that is really where you focus. That's where the discipline comes in. It's like, I'm just going to be disciplined and do the right things the right way. And it doesn't matter how long it takes. That's the key. As soon as you put timetables associated with goals, then there's a lot of pressure to make things happen. But if it's, this is the goal, this is where I'm going, and I'm totally content for it to take as long as it takes because I'm loving the process, like you can't lose in that scenario. Like there's no way that you can lose there because you can pivot, you can shift, you can adjust your goals. You can say, you know what, that's not actually a goal I want anymore. I'm going to replace it with this one. And it's like the best experience in the world. Like you just get to create things and help people. That's amazing. Yeah. But as soon as you say, okay, we need to be a 6-figure business by year 2 because I quit my job and like, this is all I got. So if I don't want to sell the house, like we got to make this happen. Like that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. And, you know, that's not a really great place to operate from or to make really good long-term choices from. So if I think about my biggest mistakes, it always comes back to not being patient, wanting the shortcut, wanting the quick fix that's going to get me just a little bit faster to where I want to be, only to realize there's a reason that shortcut doesn't work. It's because you really need to just be patient and just let it play out. Yeah. Can you hear my kids just knocking on stuff in the background?
It's great. It's great. I love it. I feel like they're like creating the Albritton band. Like they're just like, they're ready. They're ready to go. It's happening.
It's like
there's good company here.
There's only so much sound dampening you can do in a home office, you know? Like I've got sound tiles. I've got like a closed door, good mic technique. You can't stop a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old from being on the podcast once they decide they want to be there.
No, they're here. They're here to party. They're here to party, and it's fun. We welcome it. We're glad that they're here. They're trying to come in. That's what it is. They're trying to come in and be part of this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I love what you said about patience and discipline. I think that was the perfect analogy of. It's not even really comparing the two. It's like really just aligning them in what you have to have in order to make this happen. But I want to go back to what you were saying about someone saying, okay, I quit my job. I need a 6-figure business. That it's not only super hard, like it's so much pressure on yourself. It's hard to be creative. It's so hard to be creative and really just feel alive in your content. And this is something I think you do so well is you put a lot of emphasis and like, I can feel the passion. I was actually listening to your podcast right before this, and I'm going to pull up. This is the episode y'all need to go listen to. Okay. It's called The First Piece of Content Every Business Needs. I was listening to this. I was like, what has Travis got to say about this? I want to hear what he has to say, but I can feel it. Like as soon as you get into it, like you are no nonsense. Let's just get down to business and talk about the important things we need to cover. And I think that just comes from experience, confidence, but also passion. Like you're so passionate about this. And I'm just curious, when you're looking at marketing for your clients or the other people that you're working with, is there something that you can do to kind of give them that patience? Like, are you looking at like long-term strategies with people? Are you looking at, here's what we can do to optimize what you already have? Like, how does that really work when you're working with someone else?
So it's always hard to, well, especially when you start talking about podcasting and setting expectations, talk about things you can't control. It's very hard to go viral as a podcast, right?
Yes.
It's that incremental drip of growth is typically the norm. And so the first thing that I do, because I have the luxury of working with businesses, is I encourage them to find a key performance indicator, a KPI, that is not downloads. So what would make this podcast worthwhile to you if it never got super big? And typically that is some kind of business results. So whether that's you're in a B2B space, so this is going to be mainly an interview podcast, and you're going to interview prospects. And here's the framing we're going to use where it's really valuable content, but it's going to give you a reason to be in sales mode and build those relationships. And so it's like, okay, well, this year you spent X amount producing your podcast. You gained this many clients. What's the lifetime value of those clients? Is that more than what you spent on the podcast? Great. Has 80 downloads an episode? Doesn't matter. You made money, right? And so tying the if you're trying to play the podcast game to be popular and to be really big, it's very hard. It's not like TikTok where you can have 15 seconds of fame, and that's very ephemeral. So, good luck trying to get them to come back. But it's very hard to create a viral podcast. So it's first creating something that's worthwhile on its own, and then tying it to a result outside of the podcast itself is really helpful. Because the thing that makes podcasting really unique and special is the depth of the connection you have with your audience is completely unparalleled in the internet space. So like TikTok, 3 seconds of attention. Facebook video, 3 seconds as someone's scrolling past to see the video of their neighbor's kids, which is why they're actually there. They're not there to see your ad. YouTube, 3 minutes is really, really good. If you can get someone to watch 3 minutes of your video before they go and find a cat video. The podcast, they're listening to like 90% of a 45-minute conversation. Like, that's just crazy. Like, people don't give you that much attention anywhere else on the internet. And so if you can then leverage that into a connection with somebody, and then you have another way of serving them outside of the podcast itself, that can then be a vehicle to accelerate the other things you're doing. And so talking about setting expectations or how to make them happy with it, it's how do we connect this to something else that really matters to you? And how do we make the podcast something that's the favorite part of what you do? So this is something you look forward to being able to do. You feel like it positively reflects you and your values, and you're like excited to share it and be like, look, I'm in Apple Podcasts. Isn't that amazing? There's my name. Like, there's something to be said for that. And then again, just like tying it back to a really tangible result that's not, well, we don't have 5,000 downloads per episode yet, so let's just call it quits.
You just saying that makes me so sad because I've heard it so many times. I've seen it. I've seen people just quit, and I'm just like, I don't know if it's burnout. That is one option. I don't know if it's because they got frustrated that they aren't getting 10,000 downloads per episode. And I don't know, like, we need an exit interview for creators. Like, this is something we should do this, Travis. Let's like team up together. We need to be like, why did you quit? Like, what's happening? We need the exit interview, like why you quit your job, because it makes me so sad. And I think that the majority of it is unrealistic expectations and the fact that they aren't living up to this standard of what people are putting out there. Because this is another interesting thing is Travis knows a lot of behind the scenes of the podcasting space. And I mean, I just remember when we would used to talk about numbers and you're like, those people really don't have those numbers, or that's not, like, we're not going to call anybody out, but it's typically not as much. So if somebody's just getting their podcast up and running, can you tell us a little bit about like, what would you expect? Like if it was a brand new client, they launched this month, what would you tell them to expect?
So with a brand new client, if they have an email list, that factors in. If they have social media presence, that's a factor. But we're typically aiming to get to 100 downloads an episode as quickly as possible, because then that puts you in like the top 25% of indie podcasts. So right there, you can use that and say, like, listen, we have traction. People are continuing to come back to listen to it. We have something here. Let's capitalize it. Let's continue to grow it. And then you start to look at that incremental growth. But it really depends on the niche too. Like there's so many factors. If you're creating a true crime podcast, yeah, you can get 5,000 downloads an episode easily. but it's hard to build a business off of a true crime podcast,
Right.
unless you're like a recruiter for the local law enforcement office, right? Like there's only so many ways you can monetize that outside of sponsorships.
Yeah.
And so like, when I have a client and it's like, hey, we do business PR for small businesses. It's like, that's a very niche within the PR agency industry for marketing online. So when you get 400 downloads an episode, that's like amazing.
Yeah.
Because you're the only one that exists in the entire world. You're the only podcast that does this in the whole world. 400 people coming to listen to you. Like, that's amazing. Next year, let's see if we can get it to 600, 700, 800. But we're talking in terms of years. It's like, this time next year, where do we want to be? And how do we get there? And how much money do we want to spend to promote it? And how much time do you want to spend going on other podcasts to promote your show? And so all these things are factors. But for me, I've seen, like, if you can get very quickly to 100, just like leveraging all the channels they already have, even if it's like, let's hold a contest with your company and have everybody listen and leave a review, and we'll give somebody a $50 Amazon gift card. Like, there's all kinds of things you can do to get to 100. And then from there, it's just sticking with it long enough to basically outlast everyone else in your niche.
Yes.
Is the secret to winning the long game, right? So while I was at Buzzsprout, we launched Buzzcast, which is a podcast about podcasting in the podcasting industry. I've been replaced by Jordan, who's far superior to me as a host, so it's much better for it. But when we started that podcast, it was like, we had no goal for it other than we're just going to make something for Buzzsprout customers. That's it.
Yeah.
And then it became like one of the top 5 podcasts about podcasting in the world, just because we did it for 4 years. And so if you do anything for 4 years, especially in a medium like podcasting or anything online, where 4 years is an eternity, it's like, yeah, you're going to be much more established than anyone else. So it's really just about starting and then sticking with it beyond when everyone else drops out. And so if you can do that, then you can be the number one go-to person for what you talk about. So that's where the patience comes in.
I was going to say, that was a beautiful, like, circle back around to discipline. And I feel like that's a theme. This is a theme here. This is definitely, and it's funny because this is the lesson I always have to learn. I am so impatient in everything, especially when it comes to my business, because I am one of those people. It's not so much that I want to like grow and scale necessarily. It's more about, this is hard. When you're doing something new, or especially people listening, they're just getting started. They're like, I don't know what is auto leveling? What are, like, I don't understand what all these buttons are in Audacity or Hindenburg or wherever you're editing. And you're like, you're frustrated. You want to just give everything over to an expert. And then you're like, oh, I don't know if I can afford that because I'm just getting started. So it's like this weird, messy middle that you go through. And to hear Travis, I say, you need patience. You're just like, I know you're screaming at us right now. But the truth is, if you can just stick with it over time, you go back and you look at all these incredible things that you've done. Like Travis, I mean, I don't even know if I've told you this, but I have over 1,000 episodes at this point, from doing the Potty Report, doing the Profit Podcast. And y'all, I didn't do anything extra special. I just kept showing up.
Yeah.
I just kept showing up and talking. And so it's like all that incremental growth that Travis was talking about builds and builds and builds over time. And it's so incredible. I love podcasting. I know Travis does too. And I'm curious, as you were looking at your business strategy, so not for your clients, but for what you're doing, is there any one piece? Well, first of all, I have to ask you this other question because it's a little controversial. Okay. We're going to get into the controversial weeds here. How do you feel about show notes? Do you do show notes on your website? Do you just do them on, like, because people are always asking me this question and I'm curious what your thoughts are.
So there's 2 different ways to do show notes. There is bullet point references for things you talked about in the podcast with a couple sentences to summarize. So you're giving people, if they're trying to decide which episode to listen to and they're poking around, you want to give them enough to know, okay, this is what they're going to talk about. And then here are the links for the things they talk about. There's that version of the show notes. Then if you want to do the SEO play, you write a blog post. You say, not just am I writing a blog post like more show notes, but what is the keyword traffic I'm trying to tap into? How am I optimizing this page on my website for that keyword traffic to show up organically on the first page of Google? And then what is the blog post that I need to write around this question or this search term to make it the best answer on the internet when somebody has this question? Oh, by the way, there's an embed code where I have my podcast player. That's the other way to do show notes. So So it's not just about like more show notes. It has to be with that strategy being the primary driver. And then that also informs how you choose your topics. And so if you're using that strategy and you want to do blog content and you want that to start driving traffic for you, you start with the blog, actually. And then you reverse engineer what you should talk about on the podcast, where then you could write the blog that's going to get the traffic. But you start with, what are people looking for online that I can answer better than anyone else? And then how do I create written content to answer that question? And then I'm going to create a podcast out of that. And then if you're recording video, then I'm going to put it on YouTube. But you start first with, what is the stream of traffic I'm tapping into, and how do I do that to the best of my abilities? That's where more show notes actually make sense. But if you're just doing an audio podcast and uploading to Apple and Spotify, you don't need to write a blog.
Okay, y'all heard it from Travis. I knew this is what he was going to say, but I wanted to say, I told y'all this is the way, because this is something that I have heard talking about the exit interview of burnout podcasters and content creators. People tell me all the time, they're like, I don't podcast anymore because I can't do show notes. And I'm like, you can't publish something and say, this is what today's episode is about, period, publish. And they're like, well, no, I have to do the whole website. I have to do it's got to be this and it's got to be SEO. And I'm like, who said? Like, you don't have to, just because 1,000 other podcasters are the big podcasters that you follow that have a team of 20 people behind them, like, because they do all that, it doesn't mean you have to. And so I love your perspective on this. And I think that it's super helpful, especially because there's a lot of people that are either just getting started with all of content creation, or they're looking at adding another piece to, whether it's YouTube or an email list or any of those. Do you foresee adding anything? Are we going to see TikTok soon from you, Travis? Like, is there anything fun coming up that you're going to be adding to Honest Marketing? We have to know.
So here's everything that I do for the podcast. And so a lot of it is just tapping into organic traffic. But then I'll also talk about paid acquisition strategies as well. So organically, so I record video with the audio. So that allows me to put it on YouTube and podcast directories like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. YouTube is becoming a much more popular platform for people to listen to podcasts on. I think Edison Research came out and said it's actually the number one podcast listening platform, which everyone in the industry is like, that can't be true. And they're like, well, that's what the people said. So what are you going to do? And so I think people have started to figure out like, oh, like we're actually just recording a talk show, but instead of Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, it's Travis and Crystal talking about marketing, right? And so if you can capture video somehow, whether it's Zoom video, which we're using now, or other platforms like Riverside, or you're recording in the same room and you just set up your phone on a tripod and hit record, having video that you can use on YouTube gives you one more place for people to discover your content. And like really tangibly, the way this looks is you post a video and nothing happens. And you post another video and nothing happens. And you do that 10 times. And then you have one video and you're like, how does that have 100 views and these other have 4? Then you look and you're like, oh, YouTube showed that to 20,000 people. Mm-hmm. Didn't ask me for permission. They just did it. And so now that's 20,000 new people that were exposed to my content that would never have had that experience in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That just does not happen. And so YouTube gives you discoverability where platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify really struggle, because YouTube is a search engine first and foremost. And so I think having that is a really easy way to repurpose your content is really valuable, especially if you're doing Zoom interviews. Just hit record the video, upload it to YouTube. Now you have another place to distribute your content. I'm not a big fan of the audiogram thing, because people go to YouTube to watch videos of people's faces, not to see a picture with a squiggly line. That's just my 2 cents. And then figure out what platforms you're doing and leaning into. So right now it's short form vertical videos. Well, guess what? You just have 30 minutes or 40 minutes of content. I bet there's 2 or 3 little 20-second clips you can pull out of there, reformat, and then upload as a short. And I have a relatively new YouTube channel, and I'm driving it all organically just to like test and experiment on things that I use for my clients. And so I think since September, I've probably had, like 5,000 views on the whole channel. Well, I had one short that did 1,100 in the span of 48 hours. And it was not the one I expected. I was like, really? That one? That's the one you thought was great? What about this one that I put a bunch of time and effort into? 4 views, right? So rather than try and figure out what the algorithm wants, just give it everything and let it choose. But once you start to then repurpose content you already have, You're not trying to reinvent the wheel. And that's when content marketing becomes really valuable, is you have a core piece of content that you're able to pull bits and pieces out of and repurpose in different places. So that's what I do organically, is really a YouTube focus with the content with YouTube Shorts, and then obviously distributing it to audio platforms. Now, I still prefer that people subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Overcast and those kind of places, because it's a lot stickier. Mm-hmm. People subscribe to YouTube channels all the time and then never watch any more videos. But when you subscribe to a podcast, you typically listen to most of the episodes, and the retention is still way better because there's less distractions. There's not like a whole sidebar of other videos tempting you to go and watch something else. But YouTube is a really great platform for distributing and really as a marketing arm to get the word out there about what you're doing. And then I will find unique sponsorship opportunities. There's the tried and true stuff, like you can pay for a podcast promotion spot in a third-party app, like Podcast Addict is typically the best one to start with because it tends to be cheaper. Overcast, Podbean will let you do it. Pocket Casts, and some of these other, you start getting to like multiple $1,000s for an ad spot, but they're extremely effective. Like it's much more effective than running Facebook ads or Google ads, because you're advertising to people that are podcast listeners that are listening to podcasts. And so they're not trying to watch TikToks. They're trying to listen to podcasts. And so it's like, oh, well, here's another one I might be interested in. So that's one really great way to do it. The other way that I've been trying and experimenting with, and who knows if this will be a good long-term strategy, is finding untapped groups online of people that could be my ideal listener and sponsoring those groups. So I recently just finished up a sponsorship campaign where I sponsored a Facebook group of 3,000 people for a month. And it was 4 sponsored posts and 4 sponsored emails. And it was the first time this person had ever done that. And it was relatively inexpensive because it's like, hey, this is money I didn't have before. You're just saying, if I tell people to go and listen to your podcast, like, you'll give me money. That's great. Like, let's make this happen.
Yeah.
And so also like looking for creative ways that are outside of the mainstream to just say, how do I get my content in front of people that would enjoy listening to it, and do it in a way where it's very easy for them to take that next step. So all the posts had links to the episode, for instance. If you can get creative, you can find some really great opportunities to get exposure for relatively little. The problem with best practices is everyone knows them, everybody does them, they become more expensive. So like when I first started doing Overcast ads, you could buy a month for $60. And now depending on your category, it's like $1,800 for a month.
Oh my gosh.
So if only, it's like I was following somebody on Instagram, and they were joking like, the biggest mistake in my life was not being able to buy foreclosed properties in 2008 when I was in 8th grade. It's like the timing is everything.
Oh my
with
gosh,
this stuff, right?
Yes,
it's like, if only I could have been a landlord in 2009, have access to all this free cash flow. Too bad I was in middle school.
Yeah.
So you can't go back, but you can find those next opportunities and try and capitalize on those.
Yeah. And I think that with, what you're doing in the honest marketing and being so transparent, I think like I foresee, and I hope and I pray that this trend just continues with people looking for ethical marketers, people that are not trying to swindle them, and people that are just listening to their spidey senses more about like all the like, we're going to dupe these people, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And I think that your show and what you're doing, your platform is just going to continue to grow, because I'm super supportive of all of this. And I think that everybody that's listening you're going to have some new listeners after this. I'm just going to go ahead and put that out there, because there's people listening. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't like the gross, like icky stuff that people are doing. And Travis is someone that I've learned from for a long time. So all y'all, please go check out his show. And if someone's listening and they're interested in working with you, like, what would that look like? Do they need to contact you? Like, tell us all the things.
Sure. Yeah. So I work primarily with businesses that are multiple 6 figures, 7, 8 figures in annual revenue. And do just full service podcast production. And so if that's you, or you're connected to someone that feels like, hey, they would really benefit from that, then just go to honestpodcast.com. I'm building a new website. So right now it's an old website, but in the future it'll be really epic and awesome. You'll just have to take my word for it. I'm being honest about
patience.
that. Yeah. Have patience. It's coming. It's like, I could be super stressed out that it's not here yet, or just let it happen when it happens, say la vie. But yeah, and I think the first step that I always go through with a potential client is, what are you hoping to get out of this? And if you can answer that really tangibly and say, this is what I'm hoping to accomplish from this podcast, then that's where you start. And then if it makes sense for me to produce the podcast for you, then we start talking about that. If it doesn't, then I say, here's the way I would do it if I was you. And here's how you can save a bunch of money by going and doing it yourself or using these other tools. So that'd be the best place for people to go if they want to potentially work with me or see if I can help them. BeHonestPodcasts.com.
Okay, perfect. And we're going to link to that in the show notes. And Travis, this is so fun, but we're not done yet. We're not done yet because I have some rapid fire questions, and I'm not even going to ask that you're up for them. You don't even have the option. You have to answer these. But what's fun is I'm going to go back and listen to our old one because it's the same questions, but I want to see if your answers have changed from the last time you were on the show. So, okay. So the first one is, what piece of advice would you give to a brand new podcaster or content creator?
Have fun. Like, just enjoy the act of making content. Because if you can find joy in what you're doing, you'll keep doing it. If you become too goal-oriented or results-oriented too quickly, then it steals the joy out of everything you're doing. So make sure you have fun, no matter what you're doing.
That's great. Okay, the next one is, what is the dream podcast you would love to be on? And who is your dream podcast guest?
So I think dream podcast to be on. Yeah, that's a tough one. So I would probably say right now, it would be the Tim Ferriss show, because I'm just a sucker for all things just like life hacking. I talk about being patient, but I also love 4-hour work week, so try and figure that tension out.
Balance.
Yeah, that balance, right? I do have an alter ego. But that would be just phenomenal to be able to pick his brain and ask him the questions I would want to ask somebody who is always thinking about how to optimize every piece of their life, even their personal life. And I think he's just a phenomenal interviewer. So I'd love to be on his show. And I would still love to have Neil deGrasse Tyson as my guest. I'm pretty confident that was my answer last time.
You said. I was like, I don't know if it was Tim Ferriss, but I know that was the dream guest.
Yeah. So Neil deGrasse Tyson hasn't happened yet. Just got to be patient. One day it'll happen. I mean, having a podcast about marketing, my odds aren't great. So I'd have to pivot into something else, but that would be
maybe you have to create the podcast that you're like, okay, you're like SEO. You're like, okay, which one is Neil going to be like? Yes, that's the podcast. Just maybe you should call it like searching for Neil, like wanting Neil. And he's going to be like, wait, what? His PR people will be like, what is this? Are you involved? I don't know. It might get you in some trouble. So maybe we don't need to do that.
Maybe we'll see. We'll see.
Okay. And then my last question is, do you consider yourself a perfectionist?
No, I used to. But the problem with being a perfectionist is that you cry like my child in the background. Because the problem is you can never live up to your own expectations if you're always trying to be perfect. And so going back to like having fun, unless you can just say, this is good enough, and I'm going to like go on with the rest of my life. Like my life does not have to be consumed with this piece of content or this podcast episode. There's a lot of freedom that comes from that. And just knowing like I've created the thing that's good enough within the parameters that I've given it, specifically time parameters, and say, I'm not going to spend 5 hours recording an episode. Mm-hmm. I'm going to put some time into the outline and I'm going to give it a shot. And if it's terrible, I'll do it again. But if it's like, no, this is going to help somebody, I don't have to worry about it being perfect. And so once you let go of this myth that you can create the perfect thing, because you can't, then that allows you to actually enjoy creating the best thing you can right now, knowing it's only going to get better the more you do it.
I feel like you gave us so many gifts in this whole episode. Like I'm so grateful. I started this with telling you I'm so grateful, but I truly am so grateful for the mentorship that you've offered to me and all the amazing things that you've shared with the audience today, because people are going to go back and listen to this. Like, what did Travis say about this? Like, I want to go back and see, and then they're going to go listen to your show. Everybody, please go listen to Honest Marketing and go check out all the cool things that Travis is doing. But thank you so much for coming on the show today. This was great.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Like I said in the very beginning, I love a reunion. It was so good to catch up with Travis. I love what he is doing. I think that there's been a lot bigger push in the last probably 24 months for people to take a look at marketing in general and have an approach that's authentic, it's honest, and it's something that people can feel good about. Because at the end of the day, you want to feel good about the interaction you're having with your audience, with your potential customers. And I love Travis's example, the story he told about doing something and somebody like calling him out on it. Like, that didn't feel good to me. And so if you're brand new to content creation or you're brand new online business owner, then I really encourage you to listen to the feedback from your audience. And maybe you're doing something that's like an industry best practice, but if in your gut, you're like, oh, I just don't know that I feel good about that, then take a step back and like be pretty self-aware to know when you're doing something out of integrity or you're in integrity, and then you'll be able to make that final executive decision of whether you want to follow a path that has been taught to you or something that even one of your industry peers has said, this is the way to do it. If it's against your morals and values, then don't do it. Like, take a step back, practice honest marketing, practice the things that Travis and I have talked about, and just really be true to who you are and the way that you want to have the interaction with your audience just be fully within line with who you want to be, like the person that you want to be out in the world and what you're putting forward. So please go listen to Travis's podcast. Go to the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 382 for everything that we talked about here today, and to go check out Travis's podcast because it's really good. It's really, really good. And I shouldn't laugh about that, Travis. Like, I'm surprised. I knew that whatever you're doing next was going to be incredible. I kind of giggle a little bit because I love your stories and I love the way that you put examples out into the world. And I hope that you listening to this podcast, you will love Travis's podcast just as much. But again, go to the show notes, episode 382, and go check out Travis's show. But that's all I have for you today. So if this is your first time tuning in, make sure you hit the subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening to this podcast. And as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners, thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.